This is my third investigating modern text vlog for semester 2. We've just done the scene work duologue assignment, and I was partnered off with Becky. We were doing the penultimate scene in The Seagull. It's where Kostya and Nina first speak to each other, and for the first time in about 2 years, and Nina has a little bit of a emotional breakdown, and Kostya is slowly coming to terms with the fact that he's never going to be with her, and he kind of lets loose how he's feeling. It was an interesting thing to play. It was difficult, especially for someone like myself, who's not the strongest on stage when it comes to opening up and showing emotions. I'm very much my strong suit is more comedy or possibly anger. So this was something that I was glad I had the opportunity to try. I felt like I needed a little bit more work on it. We got our scenes quite late, and we only had about two weeks to work on them, which is still doable, but I felt something that wasn't in my kind of area of strength. I would have liked more time to have done it, and I felt like it would have been much better had we had more time to go through it. But during our rehearsal process, there was a few exercises that we did that were quite useful. We tried mainly just going through the scene in different styles to figure out what worked and where. Obviously there was elements of melodrama in there, of that high pace, high emotion, but obviously that's not appropriate throughout. So it was really pinpointing what different styles worked where in the script. So that was quite useful, and that was probably the thing we did the most in order to try and really cement the correct emotions for the correct time in the piece. We also tried doing the scene emotionless, as this is something that, as we said, I struggle with emotions. So doing the piece emotionless really highlighted where the emotion was needed. It was like the complete extreme contrast, which is something that helped, because even though I struggle doing it, I can still see where it's appropriate and it needs to be. I just, for some reason, I have like a block of doing it. But that helped because that really highlighted where I needed to go. On a whole, I thought the scene went well. I knew it wasn't great, but I thought the scene went better than the feedback suggested, if I'm honest. I knew that there was elements that we still needed to work on, but I was surprised at the lack of positive feedback we got in comparison to the amount of negative feedback we got. So as I said, I know I still struggle with emotion, and that was highlighted. One thing that I think I thought too logically about was we tried it quite high emotion to see how that would go, and we were told, well, we also felt that it didn't feel right to be playing at that kind of high level of emotion because it didn't seem natural. So we attempted to underplay what I did, and although I think the underplaying of it worked visually and amidst the piece, where I was attempting to underplay it, I think it then just shut out all emotion, where it was something that I was really trying to get to come out, but then I was focusing on the underplaying rather than the emotion. So although it was a good idea and I think would have worked, it had a detrimental effect on me because it caused me to then focus my attention elsewhere. We're told it was still quite safe, which is something I've heard a lot. I think when performing, when I'm like kind of in my comfort zone, and I know even if it's not the best, but I know it's something that I can do, I then stick in that comfort zone rather than keep trying to push it, which is something that I personally want to work on, and I've said that before even receiving this feedback. Although I did make choices with what I wanted to do, it was still not last minute, but the choices weren't still set in stone. It was kind of like, well, maybe we should attempt to underplay it, and that's what we went with, rather than me being like, right, I'm going to underplay it and I'm going to do this. I need to be bolder with my choices and then make sure that I fully back them. The stakes weren't high enough, which I get comes from the lack of emotion in the scene, because this is this is the penultimate scene in the play, so everything that's happened has kind of been building up to this moment, and it's all about to end, and it didn't feel like the end of a play from watching it. And that is because where I struggled to kind of show emotion and put that kind of despair or panic, it didn't feel like there didn't feel like there would be a consequence if one of the characters just left or one of the characters didn't turn up. But it was that scenario where you needed to know that what's happening between the two characters on the stage was quite important and intense, but that wasn't coming across. It could have just been two people that met up the day before and were just having another chat. It didn't seem like the stakes were high enough in the scene. Triggers, I don't have emotional triggers myself that I use to then make myself emotional on stage, which is a negative impact for an actor. But saying that, I also missed the character's triggers. There were things that happened on stage which would trigger a response from my character, and that didn't happen. One of the feedback was suggested that we weren't ready for the scene, and this is the one that I think I have the most issue with, because I don't think that's particularly fair or true. Just as we didn't have a great amount of rehearsal time, granted. The scene didn't go as well as it could have done, granted, but I don't think that's a comment on us being ready to do the scene. I think should be more of a comment on, I don't think we were ready to put on the scene. As an actor, I felt like I could do that scene, especially with more time, more evaluation of the text and more preparation. I don't feel as an actor I'm not ready to do it. I just feel as if I wasn't ready to put it on that day. That's how I felt, whether that's the case or not. I feel as if me and Becky did work well together. I don't think that had anything to do with it. We've got a good working relationship. We can get on with it. It's not, we don't conflict with each other, and we're more than willing to then we had outside of college time rehearsals, we put the effort in together. I just think that a scene wasn't suited to our strong points, which I think was good, because there's no point sticking to your strong points. But I feel we worked well together, and it was a good challenge for both of us to both do something that I don't think we were particularly strong in. But I don't think it was a bad thing for me to be working with her, and I enjoyed working with her. I didn't ever not want to go to rehearsals or just think this isn't going to go well, because we do have quite a good working relationship. But on a whole, I do agree with most, if not all, of the feedback. There is just a couple of points that I feel were slightly too negative and worded poorly, unless that's just how I've taken the feedback. But I knew the scene wasn't amazing, but it was a good experience for both of us to try and develop this challenge. And I feel like we did it not well, but okay. It wasn't awful. I don't feel it was awful. But there is obviously room for improvement, and I'm not denying that at all. But we did put a lot of work into, especially with the text finding, the events, and the context of what's happened before and what's happening after. We did put a lot of the textual analysis in as well, and that was something that apparently didn't come across, which if that visually didn't come across, that's fine, but we didn't want it to seem as if we just kind of got the script, got up and had a go. We did generally put a lot of time into actually evaluating the text to get that base layer of understanding before then trying to get up and practically do it to find what works, what doesn't, and eventually put on a piece together. But the feedback was fair, and it's useful. It's highlighted a lot of the things that I already knew that are proving that even though I'm attempting to work on, still isn't coming across. So now I know that I need to put more time in than I already am in order to improve those areas of my performance, which is still weak, which is good to know. But I did feel as if we did get a lot of negative feedback on the piece and not much positive, which was a little bit of, not demoralising, but it was a little bit, was there anything good in the piece? But it was useful. I'm now going to be talking about voice for this scene. In the few weeks of this semester after we had our last set voice assignment, and the only thing we were left to be marked on was our vocal quality within the duologue scenes that I've just been talking about. We started doing a lot more vocal exercises, which I've actually found quite useful, because as I said, I've struggled to just get, if someone told me to kind of do like this vocal quality, I wouldn't know what to do with like my tongue, my larynx, my positioning, all of those elements which can change your voice. I still don't feel like I know how to do them comfortably. But we've used quite a good vocal exercise of, so you hold a vowel or a noise with your natural voice. You then go into slack folds in order to kind of put your larynx back into like its resting bass position, which isn't always what you expect it to be. Whereas I feel I've got quite a, like, this is my normal speaking voice, which compared to someone else is a lot deeper, and that's because of where my larynx rests normally in its comfortable position, but that doesn't actually mean that's the neutral. So for me, although this is kind of my normal speech base point, to other people it's much deeper. So starting off with the slack fold to kind of reset and put your larynx into its base position, then going into thick folds for the stronger sound, into thin for the kind of slightly retracted thinner sound, and then into stiff folds. We then went on to a constriction exercise. So you start off with your normal voice, you go into constricted, into mid, and then to wide folds, so there's no constriction at all. And sometimes you want to use constriction like on purpose, whether obviously it's dependent if it's relevant to the scene, but sometimes you do need to use constriction, and it's not always a negative thing. And that exercise of going from normal to constricted, mid back to wide, helps fix it. If it like accidentally happens, you know how to then get your voice going from constricted, if you didn't want to use it, back into its normal position. We then went on to a different, similar to the first one, starting off with glottal, into smooth, then into aspirate abrupt and aspirate gradual, which helps. This one I still find quite tricky, and I don't know what it is. It's getting the kind of going from the breath with the, like, especially with the gradual, not the gradual, sorry, the abrupt, going from the kind of breath into then the noise is something that I don't know what it is, because it doesn't seem difficult, but I do have to really focus on doing it. We then did exercises for wide AES and narrow AES to kind of differ the noise without, especially without going nasally. A lot of people, with me personally, when I was going from maybe normal position into a wide AES to kind of get that noise a bit thicker and louder, it would go nasally because I was doing it wrong. And this exercise has kind of shown that you can actually go from wide to narrow from normal without having to add elements of nasality to your voice. For the scene, it was an interesting one because what my character was saying at the time was high emotion, was quite, not panicked, but like there was an element of desperation in his voice. And at times I was sitting there thinking, my voice isn't reflecting that, because it didn't make sense for him to be very like the over the top with the emotion in his mouth, because he's still trying to have a calming effect on the other character. So I was trying to balance having a relatively normal speech voice with then having elements of emotion coming through. And I used the voice qualities from like the sob or cry to try and, it wasn't panic, but there were elements of sadness at times, there were elements of despair and stress. And there was a few aspects of that voice quality that I really tried to get through. And the way that I used those, because I didn't want to focus too much on thinking, right, I need to do this with my tongue or this with my larynx, because I didn't want that to detract from my focus into the scene. So I picked some that I knew that I could probably do easier and enough to affect the voice. And those, so it starts off with a smooth, true vocal onset, which was useful as well, because that vocal onset is relatively similar to just normal speech. It's not identical, but it's not too different at the fact that if the elements of the sob didn't come through, it wouldn't sound like I was doing something else that was too different from a normal speaking tone, because then the scene would look stupid. I tried to focus on having a low larynx height, which again, I'm pretty sure is something that's not too difficult for me, because I feel maybe my larynx does rest slightly lower down than others, where I do have a slightly deeper voice and I do have a higher voice. Mid-jaw height was something that I tried to focus on, because that was something that I could use relatively well, and it wasn't something that was took too much focus on. Anchoring was useful, as a lot of the time I was actually seated or standing while the other character was walking around me, so I didn't have to focus on keeping my upper body anchored whilst moving around the space. A high tongue position was something else I also used. And the good thing about it was I didn't have massive chunks of text, whereas my partner did. So I know it's probably not the best thing to do, but I could kind of focus myself on prepping what I need to do during my partner's lines, in order to, rather than being like kind of one line, and I don't have that much time to prep, because I still feel like, for me, I need time to kind of ease into getting my body, or the areas that affect my voice, into the right position. So that worked out quite good for me, and I know that's not the best way to do it, and hopefully it will become more natural over time, but within this scene I feel like that helped. And I also tried to focus on having a wide aripiglotic sphincter, as that also increased the volume without me having to maybe go into belt quality. And it also, coupled with all the elements of the sob and cry, it emphasised that emotion more. At times I don't feel like the emotion came through in my voice, because I was focusing on trying to underplay, because I felt like he was kind of a broken man at this point. But there were times where something would happen, like a trigger in the scene, and I feel like that emotion would come through out of my voice. I feel as if my vocal quality in the scene was probably one of the stronger elements, not specifically for showing the emotion, but the appropriate choices, and especially with audibility as well. I feel as if that went quite strong in the scene, but there are still, I would have liked the emotion to have come through the piece more, and I feel me underplaying it kind of then detracted from getting that emotion through. But there were times where that emotion was noticeable, and I feel like when it was, the scene worked quite well.